general kind of rules. I don't mind questions at all. Just wave. If I don't see you, stand up and wave. But I don't mind questions at any point. If you don't understand something or want to know more about it, please feel free to ask. After we finish with the presentation, I'm going to show you a few things to do, and I can ask questions and answer questions and things like that then. So the Newberry. The Newberry is in Chicago. It is a fabulous place, as he says. They don't let me go back into the bookshelves anymore because I don't come out. I keep finding marvelous things to look at. That one. Yay. I'm going to talk. Yes, sir.
Is the Newberry owned by the city or is that a private organization?
It's private.
Okay.
As I told somebody earlier, we depend upon the kindness of strangers to pay for ourselves.
How old is the library?
How old is the library? 1887 was the creation of the library.
So who did the initial funding, do you know?
Newberry. Walter Newberry. We'll go through some of this in
I went to grade school named Walter Newberry.
It's,
Newberry.
Yep, that's him. Some general things about doing genealogy. It sounds like most of y'all are pretty knowledgeable about these things, so we don't have to spend too much time on it. When you get started, start non-tech. Start by looking what you've got around the house, or your grandmother's house, or your mother's house, or whoever's house you have in the family, all those aunts and uncles that are hiding things away and claiming they didn't know where that letter was. They know. But start surveying things like any kind of certificate, medals from the military, any kind of licenses, any, somebody may have sat down and written a family history if you're really, really lucky. If you're really lucky, they're telling the truth. Interview older relatives. I can't emphasize that one to the younger people here enough. There's just no way you can ever talk to the family members, the older family members enough, because they know it all. The question is, will they tell you? I had a great aunt who lied to me for years and said her father was killed in a construction accident. He actually abandoned the family. But my father and I have sat at too many funerals and said, oh darn, I wish we had talked to them more. So, and organize your information. And when I say organize, I mean something like this. You got to get things, got to create a skeleton, an outline to put your information in. And you start out with yourself, of course, and your parents and their parents. And then you go to the next page, because this is going to be a long chart. You know it is. There are going to be lots of people on this thing. You're going to know a lot about them as you go through time. This one, for instance, is mine. This is me. Yes, I am a Southerner. You probably have figured that out. My dad. And you notice there's an asterisk by his name. That's because that wasn't his name on his birth certificate. My grandmother hadn't decided what she wanted to call him yet, and they wouldn't let her, take him home from the hospital until he had a name. So he became his dad's Junior. Compton E. Lowery, Jr. He eventually became Jerry David Lowery. There's the Compton he was named after, my grandmother. This is my mother, who unfortunately I need to update this because she passed last fall. But notice her middle name, Virginia Love. Now, she was a sweetheart. She was a fine lady, but that wasn't why she was named Love. She was named Love because her mother's family name was Love. Happens very often with Southern families. Keep those names in the family. And you notice my grandmother has an unusual middle name, Odell. That also is a family name. So just in this little bit of information, you start picking out a lot of things. One is that there's a lot of Jacksons. They're in Louisiana. There's a lot of things down south. They all live together. They all stayed in the same general neighborhood. So you're starting to pick up things already, about where you need to look and what you need to do. So follow the basic principles. Start with yourself. You know you, and then move backwards in time. Don't depend on the last document somebody has, which is their death certificate, because they're not there to correct it. Start with things that you know from the beginning. Start with birth certificates and things like that. Find all those primary records. All the information I had on there, I found them on primary records somewhere. Census, wedding certificates, things like that. Research local history. I think that's one of the things we do least well. We don't follow up around what's going on. Having that county history is going to be great for you. And in doing information searching about a place, you start finding that even if you don't find your ancestor, you're finding friends of them. And you're starting to do a fill-in. You're adding muscles to those bones we had, that skeleton that we had on the drawing. And also join a genealogical society or a genealogical and historical society. A lot of my family, as I said, came from Mississippi, so I should be joining a genealogical society for there. If your family has been in Chicago since, the late 1800s, you probably want to look at something like a Chicago Genealogical Society or the Northwest Suburban one. They can really help you, and a lot of times you'll find in their newsletters and in their magazines that they have written about things that you want to know about. They may even have information about your family. And never forget about the Newberry. We really are a great place. The Newberry is an independent library. That means it's not a public library. It was created separate from, and in fact, almost before there were public libraries in Chicago. It's a research library. A research library is one where people come to do research, which means we don't want to have our material going out on loan. We don't send the maps and the books and the collections of papers out to anybody. We don't circulate them. We keep them in and the scholars come in. Because you can imagine somebody coming in from Japan and saying, what do you mean somebody checked out the book I need? They're coming here because that's where the information is. And so we're not circulating, and we have closed stacks. Are you familiar with stacks? The term stacks just means the bookshelves. Okay. So if they're closed, they don't let you wander through, which on one level I kind of hate, because I found some of my most interesting books by wandering through and saying, oh look, this is a section on Louisiana. Let me see what all they have around close by. But on the other hand, we have some amazingly old and delicate things in those stacks. And there are 10 stories of them. 10 floors of library books. Pretty much as closely together as you can. So we keep the stacks closed, and the advantage is you say, I want this book. And you go sit it down at a table, and in about 5 minutes, the book magically appears. Because we sent one of our employees back there, found the book, and brought it out to you. It has a humanities focus. Humanities, history, literature, arts, culture, the Renaissance, maps. Maps, that's kind of spreading over into social sciences almost, which is sort of what genealogy and local history are. But we have a humanities focus, and we're open to researchers ages 14 or over. And sometimes people get really upset if they can't bring their kids in, but we've never failed to find that the kids get bored real quick. It's not the kind of library when they can go to the reading circle in the kids' room and play on the jungle gym. So 14 or older. And this is where we live. This is our little neighborhood. The Newberry is here. Across the street is Washington Square Park, which some of you may have heard of as Bughouse Square. In the summer, while we're having our book fair over here, which is, by the way, a great place to look for old books, books about histories of different counties and maps and things like that, across the street they're having an oratory contest, a soapbox oratory, arguing a point. And people get up and give their discussion, and somebody else comes up, and they boo at each other, and they yell and clap and everything like that. It's a great time. Now, something very important to know about, of course, is here we are. This is Lake Michigan. We're not very far off of Michigan Avenue and State Street. How do you get there? What do you do with the car once you get there? They don't, just fold up and go in your pocket. Right down here, see, this is the library, this is Clark Street. Just south of the park is a parking garage where you can park and get a discount. Now, that may not sound like much to you. You can park for free out here, but it's not free anywhere in Chicago, I promise you. There is an L line here at Chicago and Franklin. There's an L line at Chicago and State, so you could take an L in. That would be part of the whole Chicago experience that way. Unfortunately, parking around here is kind of tight. There's a school across the street. There's a big school over here. So
where's that lot exactly?
Where's the
parking lot?
The parking lot is here, where this P is. So it's on Clark Street, just at Chestnut. Yeah, and you can get, when you get your ticket there, bring it into the library and we'll validate it so you can get a little bit off. I've seen so many people get up in the middle of working on things and say, "Ah, my 2 hours are up," and they have to go run outside and put money in the meter. So it has the advantage of letting you stay there most of the day. And asking about Mr. Newberry, this is Mr. Newberry, Walter Newberry, entrepreneur, robber baron, transportation, land, and everything else kind of expert. Oops, sorry, pushed the wrong button. Come on, let's go back. Aha, back to Newberry. Mr. Newberry came here when everybody was coming to buy land. He bought, in fact, 400 acres in the near north area. That sounds like a real good investment at the time, right? There was no way to get across the river. So one of the things he is supposed to have done is create a ferry service. He buys land on the north side of the river, and he gives you a way to get across the river. He can sell his land and make a fortune. He was, however, a very civic-minded person. He probably had every major job in the city except for mayor. And he was greatly concerned because we did not have in Chicago a library of any sort. And he set in his will provisions for creating a library. He had 2 daughters, and the provision was that if those 2 daughters died without issue, then the money that he had left would go to building a library. So, Mr. Newberry in 1868, his family had gone to Europe for a while. He was going to meet them over there, got on the boat, and died on the way over. Now, he was really actually kind of lucky because if he hadn't been an incredibly rich and famous guy, they probably would have just thrown him overboard. But instead, they put him in a giant barrel of alcohol and preserved him so he could be taken back to America to be buried. There's a bust of Mr. Newberry in our public library, our non-public library, in our open spaces on the public area of the library. That's, it looks very much like, this much of Mr. Newberry. And being the staid and serious sorts of people that librarians are, we take turns figuring out what kind of hat we're going to put on him. For the last year, in 2018, we had the first floor of the building remodeled. And by the way, it's worth the trip just to see it. We have, great rooms for public use, but we also have things like a welcome center where you can get all, settled in, and they'll tell you where to go and things like that, get you registered. We have a bookstore, a really nice little bookstore that has a lobby, has an area for you to sit and drink coffee and tea and things like that. Very civilized. And Mr. Newberry, during the period when we were remodeling all this, wore, of course, following the law, he wore his yellow hat. Yes. Now for public events like our holiday party, he wears a top hat. So, and it's really cold, he gets a ski cap. So we have to have some fun with him. But he left all that money to us. I think it was about $4 million. He says, we're going to build a great library. It's going to be a whole city block from Walton to Oak Street and from Clark Street to Dearborn. And then suddenly they realized that if they spent all of that money on the library, they wouldn't have any money for books. So they cut the building into half of what they would have had and bought books. Oh, Lord, have they bought books. and manuscripts and maps. And they've had great donors, people who have contributed money, people who went to Europe and got fabulous collections of books and manuscripts and maps and donated them to us. Do you know that the only first folio of Shakespeare's plays in the city of Chicago is at the Newberry? I went into the vault one day and the map curator opened a book and let me look at it. It was from the 1400s. It was a map for Prince Harry, the explorer, the Portuguese ruler. It was immaculate. It was amazing. We have about 1.5 million books, 5 million manuscript pages, manuscripts being basically separate pages as opposed to being put into a book. 600,000 maps. We go from the Middle Ages to the early 20th century. And a lot of these actually will relate to things that you're going to be interested in eventually. Our core collections have to do with American history, including probably the finest collection of indigenous and American Indian studies in the world, really. We really emphasize Chicago and the Midwest for a lot of our collections. A third of the people who come to the library are there for genealogy. So it is a big part of, and people pay attention to us when we say the genealogy department needs to do this. The history of the book, manuscripts and archives, maps, travel, exploration, the Renaissance. We have a wonderful Renaissance Center. Music, including sheet music, religious studies, a variety, all under the realm of the humanities, but varied in so many ways. So, genealogy there. Where do you start? You got your chart. You start looking for census research. You probably all know about the census. Every 10 years, starting in 1790, the longer they did it, the more information we learned about people. But it was really not until 1850 that we started getting the names of everybody in a household. And that's when it really got interesting for genealogists. Nowadays, we're getting relationships ahead of the household, how much they're valued at, information about their age, gender, how many kids they've had that didn't live, where they were born and their parents were born, what their occupations were. Fabulous stuff. Things that you never would have thought of before would be in a government document. Yes, sir?
How are they indexed?
How are they indexed? They're indexed mostly on, at this point in life, most people are looking at them through Ancestry or Family Search or something like that. They're indexed by them. And as you can imagine, they're not always exactly accurate. Handwriting is hard to read sometimes.
Not by street address.
No. But you can ascertain where somebody, where they lived. And, if you know, they lived at the corner of Main and Oak Street or wherever, you can find on enumeration maps where that is, what set of papers it is, and so you could limit your search to that area. And along here, you've got street names and street numbers for each one of the houses. So you can tell from that where specifically you are in the city.
Looking like where the next page or the page before is. I'm always looking for the page.
I know, isn't that great? Just like, oh yeah, hey look, there's Uncle Ben. Yeah, I know what you mean.
There were relatives that lived close to each other.
So we've got census records. We've got hard copies of them, but we've also got, of course, the subscription databases. And we have indexes of them, and they're available. You can use them. But this isn't, it's something that's kind of like basic for us these days, isn't it? We have historical newspapers. As you can see, some of them are not in great shape, but we've retained them, we've kept them, we've preserved them. We have a huge amount of Chicago newspapers, probably about 40 different newspapers going back to the 1860s. Some of them aren't in English. We have a couple of lines of German newspapers from the late 1800s, early 1900s. We have papers from all over the country. Yes, sir?
Becky, if somebody actually was interested in one of the newspapers that you had or that maybe has never been digitized, doesn't exist anyplace else, do you actually bring out the originals to them to do the pages
They're probably, depending on what kind of condition they're in, we will probably bring them out into the special collections room rather than to the general reading room. And it would be on, kind of a cradle thing to hold it because it will be very delicate in some cases. But yes, they can see the actual newspapers.
The newspapers are in such a fairly good condition that the fear is that people wouldn't be, just by flipping it, they'd be ripping it and throwing it.
There's always that fear, but as I say, if you're sitting like in special collections, there's somebody watching you all the time. And if you start doing like this, you're not going to be, looking at that paper very long.
And are you then allowed to, either with your phone, I'm assuming, rather than go to a copy machine, but are you allowed then to make copies of
Yes, you can use your phone to take a digital copy as long as you don't use flash.
Okay.
Or if you would prefer that someone else does it, we have hover scanners and cameras that we can take a picture of the page for you. For a small fee, of course, but... So, yes, you can see the originals. Yes, sir?
Should we use cotton white gloves or anything there?
I'm sorry?
Cotton white gloves?
That depends. There's some discussion in archival circles about what the value of doing that is, because a lot of times the thing you're turning is so fragile that you really need to be able to feel it to know whether you've put too much pressure. So, sometimes the gloves make it worse instead of better. We frequently leave it up to the person to decide what they think they ought to do. I thought I saw another hand, but okay. So we have wonderful collections of newspapers, some of them going back to colonial days on the East Coast. City directories. For those of you who think of a directory as being something like, well, you probably don't even think of it as being a book, do you? Yeah. In the olden days, they had yellow pages and white pages, and they listed all the people and their phone numbers and their addresses in them. Well, that's for phone books. These are directories. These go back before phones. These list people, and these go back to the very earliest days of the city, to the 1860s, when they would list everybody in town and their address. And a lot of times they would put what your occupation was, which is wonderful. I think they're one of the most overlooked sources we have. We have a complete run of the Chicago directories. Most of it is on microfilm, but I will show you in a few minutes that we have some of them available digitized online. Yes, sir?
Did you have to pay to put your name in there?
No. No, they made their money in the directories by selling advertising and selling copies of the directory.
Because I got some cheap relatives who would never...
Yes, sir.
Becky, does the Newberry try to obtain not city directories, but more like actual phone directories from the 60s or 70s?
Yes, we have.
It's amazing, I can tell you this. Our library has a few in our collection. Some that go back to like the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. I am astounded at how many inquiries I've had directed to me through our blog, who somebody does a search and finds out that a 1945 Chicago City directory exists in our collection, and they're just trying to find out somebody who might have lived at some address.
Right, or where a certain ice cream store was, or where, all kinds of things. In fact, we've got so much use out of it. There are a few of them. There's a run through the 40s where we've had to close them to use by the public, but we will be getting them digitized so that you would be able to still use them. But yeah, they're very popular, and we have a run all the way up to, when they quit publishing them on a regular basis.
And you said you have some digitized, but some are hard copy?
Yes, some are hard copy, and we have about 10 years worth that have been digitized from 1860s to 1923. We just chose, which makes a good substitute for the missing 1890 census. You can look for people in that way. And it's also nice to know where they live. There's a couple of other things in directories that are useful. You remember some of the directories had a blue section that was the government section? They have something like that at the beginning of directories for the city directories. And they'll list all the government departments and who's in what office and things like that. But in addition, they have a list of maybe apartment buildings, asylums, secret societies. I mean, how secret could they be if they're in a directory? But, oh, what, are we supposed to have a secret society kind of ritual tonight? No. But
You passed the initiation already.
good. So the directories have a lot of information that you might not suspect, but some, I mean, for their primary purpose is finding people and where they lived, and sometimes you'll find them and they'll be at 4 or 5 in a row with the same last name at the same address, and you say, aha, I found the family. You know, and all the kids are old enough that they've got their own jobs, but they're still living at home. Also, they frequently have street guides at the beginning. A street guide tells you where a street is. You know, it's like, you know, the Chicago way of referring to things. It's 400 west and 600 north. Well, that's kind of how the street guides work. They say, and it's very helpful because, you know, you're looking for Damon and Damon Street doesn't exist, but you know that it's at a certain place, and you can find that that place is once upon a time was called Robey, R-O-B-E-Y, instead of Damon. So use your street guides to go back and forth and help you understand where places were. Questions? Okay.
Strictly alphabetical.
My father, who was born in 1896,
Mm-hmm.
used to call Division Street Center Street. So at one time it was probably named Center Street.
Right. We have a copy online, and Chicago History has a copy online of the street name changes up through the late 40s, where you can look all of them up. They're not terribly neatly printed or anything, but you can definitely read them and see them, as well as finding out about street number changes, because in 1909, most of the west and the north side of Chicago had all their street numbers changed. And then in 1911, the Loop decided they had to have their street numbers changed. I've heard a lot of reasons why, you know, the businesses downtown didn't want to spend money for new stationery or something like that. But anyway, they came a couple of years after the rest of them. And it really makes sense to have renumbered them because they had taken in so many suburbs at that point. Things that we refer to now as neighborhoods in Chicago used to be their own cities, like Hyde Park. So renumbering was essential, but I bet it drove them crazy for a while. We have family histories. You might accidentally get really, really lucky and have somebody say, "Oh, I'm a Hoagland," and we say, "Oh, look, we have the Hoaglands in America. Go to it." Of course, people usually come in and say, "What do you mean you don't have all of my family history in one book?" It's like, oh boy. So, but we have a number, as in the tens of thousands of family histories that have been written and we have copies of, which you can find in the catalog. We're big on court, cemetery, and land source records. I don't exactly understand why, but our early donors would go around and just scoop these up, it looks like, a listing of all the cemeteries in an area, the minutes from a Quaker organization, the probate from a county somewhere in Ohio. We have all kinds of things like this. So you can narrow it in, look for somebody, sometimes when you hit a brick wall and you can't find somebody, this may be the way to go about it, is looking for where's the body buried or who inherited. And local histories. Now, when I say local history, we don't really mean just the Chicago area. It means a history that is local to a spot, like a county or a small town or something like that. So we have a number of histories for specific areas like counties. And they, again, are very useful. They frequently have a list of the people who live in the county. And there's a wonderful one I found the other day of Marion County, Illinois, that says, it's got a list of everybody that lived there. It says, born here, moved here in such and such a year, died last year. So you never know what kind of information you're going to find, but you are going to find a lot of little towns that aren't there anymore on these old histories. And they like to do this, I don't know exactly what you would call it. It's yes, biographies, but these people paid for it. So it's a little glossy biography. Who's got the most money? Yes. Sometimes they'd have a drawing of their farm or their house or something like that. They would tell you who they were married to and who their wonderful children were and when they died. And it's pretty glossed over in some cases, but yeah, it's.
Where they'll even say like who the parents were or where they came from.
Yes. So they can't provide a lot of information about families. And there'll be other things in that local history, like the town and when it was created and who the main store owners were and things like that. But you'll also frequently find these short biographies of people who lived in the area. We've got a lot of those. Military records. You were mentioning Fold 3. We have a lot of military records. And probably one of the things we're best known for in terms of military records that aren't in Fold 3 are regimental histories from Civil War organizations, particularly units from Illinois. Regimental histories are, as they sound like, when a unit has had its history written, who was in the unit, what battles they were involved in, how many people and who was killed when, who all won awards and medals and things like that. A regimental history. So you start out looking for it, you can't find it under regimental histories. But there are ways of getting to a list of all of them through the catalog. That's why I keep going back to the catalog. The catalog is very important to us because it's providing things that you're not getting in a lot of subscription databases. Passenger list. All of us say, oh, wonderful, like Ellis Island. Well, that's a big one. Ellis Island, Castle Garden. You get to it online. It's very helpful. It tells you a lot of things you need to know, but it's not the only one in the world. In fact, they're scattered all over the place. There's a site called Olive Tree that has a lot of records that are older. They go back to the 1700s, and they're ships that came in to Philadelphia. So you're starting to look at those kind of things. We also have other, for lack of a better description, fragmented records. A record from this port, a set of records from that port. And that's the way looking for passenger records is prior to Ellis Island. It's, you just have to try to put the pieces together and pull and see who has what records. But we have a lot of passenger records. And maps. The Newberry is famous for its map collection. And this one happens to be a copy in black and white of a Sanborn fire insurance map. It is, as it might imply, fire insurance maps are how a fire insurance company learned about what a neighborhood was like so they could decide how much to charge you for your fire insurance. If you're living in a wooden house next to a business that has a lot of chemicals and fire and boilers and things like that, your rates are going up. And they had a company called Sanborn that created maps going back to the 1860s. There were several of them, but this is the most famous and probably the one that is best known. Unfortunately, they made copies of all these maps and they microfilmed them and everything, and they did it, in one of those famous penny wise and pound foolish decisions. These are all in color. You could look at that map and say, that's a pink house. I know it's made out of brick. It's a yellow house. I know it was made out of wood. They've got little notes all over them. You know where the water fire hydrants are, and you know where the manhole covers are. And you know that, the Havana cigar importers took up this building. It's a wonderful picture. You can say, I know that they lived, 2 blocks east of the Swift packing company in the old stockyards area. You also know that they had a horrible smelling neighborhood then, or that the L went right down the middle of their street. They didn't get much sleep at night. You can learn a lot of things from this, but you can learn it a lot better when it's in color. Yes, sir?
Does the Newberry have an index that says we have a map of Atlanta from 1893? Can I see if you've got the map before?
We have the maps listed through the catalog, so we could look and say Atlanta maps, Georgia, Atlanta maps, and we could see how many of them we have and what years we have them for. And then you could request them and they would be brought to you.
Is the catalog online?
The catalog is online, yes sir. Now, one of the saving graces about the Sanborn maps is from 1905 to the 1950s, we have a copy of the original color maps that you can look at. The Library of Congress is in the process of digitizing and putting online all of these maps. And Chicago, luckily, is one of the cities that they really early on have put up those maps. So the Library of Congress's Geography and Map Division has it available. It's a little tedious to work through, but they have some instructions on it. The Sanborn maps were never intended to be a research tool. They were a business tool. And they would go through and, every 2 or 3 years they'd go through and say, oh, that building burned down, they built something here. And they would go through and in the original cut and paste, they would draw out that little building and paste it over where the other one was. And if you're very careful, you can look in these in the originals and see the outline of whatever it was. I love looking at the one that's just north of the UIC campus downtown, because you can see where they've drawn the Eisenhower Expressway over all these buildings. So, you can see what was, what had been, as well as what is. Yes, sir?
These got to be pretty large pieces of paper.
Mm-hmm.
They put them on microfilm and shrink them down.
Yep.
How are you able really to identify what's there without a microscope?
Well, if you do it on microfilm, if you actually look at the microfilm, you can blow it up some. They also have a collection that's paid for by the state of Illinois do y'all have Sanborns through Carly?
We used to have some electronic Illinois Sanborn maps.
Mhm.
We only had it for a short time. Usage on it didn't warrant us to continue to get it.
Yeah.
And just like you're saying, I find personally when you're looking at these digital maps on, let's say, who knows whatever size monitor you do, but it's like your monitor still isn't big enough, and what happens is you're moving the map to try to find your place.
Right.
You're totally lost in the spatialness of the presentation of the map. So it becomes very frustrating to find.
It can be that way. But like I say, we do have original books of these. And a lot of the collections go into the neighboring suburbs, or what used to be suburbs. So all around Chicago, you can go from Evanston around, you can see them back in the days before they were, as grown up as they are now, back when Northbrook was Shermerville and things like that. Now, of course, we also have the electronic resources, Ancestry. We actually have a very nice copy of Ancestry because we've had a long-term relationship with them. And we get everything they sell to the public, whether it's U.S. or Canada or worldwide. And we also seem to get these little databases that show up and we didn't know where they came from. They're beta testing to see if the database is in good working shape. So we probably have one of the best Ancestry.com. It's an advanced step over the library edition like most public libraries have, and it's definitely an improvement over the personal version. So I think you have American Ancestors, Fold 3, Heritage Quest. So all of these you would have here. ProQuest we have digitized the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the Chicago Defender. And the Defender is the national African American newspaper that goes back to the early part of the 20th century. And it's very interesting. I was looking for something the other day and ran across this headline from 1919 that said that Mississippi was appalled to discover that 100,000 of those colored people had left the state and they couldn't imagine why. And they were all heading out north and they were sneaking out in the middle of the night and going to, it's like, what are you talking about? Why would they want to stay? They were tenant farmers. But they were shocked and dismayed to discover 100,000 of them disappeared over the winter.
Now they're leaving Illinois.
Yeah, everybody's leaving Illinois. I don't know if I'd move back there. It's too hot for me. Go for somewhere a little more in between.
A week or so ago, we might have all one.
There are a couple of other subscription databases that neither one of us have that might be interesting to some of you if you have, for instance, British and Scottish, Irish, Welsh backgrounds. Find My Past is a good one. One of the things I like about it is has listings of people who came in on ships to England and people who went out. So sometimes you can catch your relatives coming in and, in one port and going across country and leaving from another port, which is kind of cool, assuming that, you actually are interested in having that particular database. So we have family research files. People donate their work, in effect, their work product to us, and we have vertical files that have the notes and materials from their searches for families. So we have these listed in a vertical file, these vertical files in a Excel database. And so we could look for a particular family name through there or something if you wanted to look for that.
Are those in the catalog too?
No, unfortunately they're not, and we've been trying to figure out the best way to make them available.
Is that what you noted?
I know. You come down there and say, oh, would you look at this? One thing about it is you can always write us a note at an email at reference@newberry.org and ask us a question like that. In fact, if you've got one thing you want to look for and don't want to have to drive, 25 miles downtown or take the train, then you can send us an email and ask us the question, and we will check our records and look through our materials and see what we have for you. Special collections is a separate division in a sense. We have a floor that is the general reading room, which is where the most of the materials are handled for genealogy and local history. And then in special collections, if you get one of those maps that's particularly delicate, or you have a book that's quite old or something like that, you would go up to special collections on the 4th floor to see about it. We have, among other things, this, for instance, is an example of a Pullman porter's employment record. Can you imagine how important this could be to somebody? I mean, James Phillips was born in St. James, Louisiana. That gives his birth year, whether he had a vaccination, his height, his weight, and his complete, he was hired in 4/20/29, 6 months before the crash. And you'll notice that there are a lot of times when he's furloughed. It happened a lot. If there wasn't enough service, they would furlough them. So in this case, they even get a picture of their ancestor. So these kind of records, we have a number of different records from different railroad lines like IC and Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, things like that, where we have at least some employment records that might help somebody find somebody, Grandpa worked for the railroad, they say, let's see what we can find. So, special collections, in addition to the things like maps and old books and newspapers, has materials like this. We have, like I think you do, a connection to the Family History Library, which has gone through chaos for the last year and a half. Yeah, we're both affiliate libraries, which means that there are things that you can see in our library at familysearch.org that you might not be able to see at your home. Just like there are things you can see here, the digital materials that you can.
When we converted to that, I was astounded just on my own personal research for the Polish village area.
Mm-hmm.
At home, I could see maybe 5 out of 20 microfilm images.
Mm-hmm.
Here, like 15 out of 20. It was
Mm-hmm.
astounding.
Right. And if you go to one of the family history centers, then you have access to everything. Or if you go to someplace like Allen County in Fort Wayne, Indiana, then they have, because of their special relationship, you can see everything. But, I'm a big fan of Family Search, and I recommend it highly. But they sure did put us through chaos about a year and a half ago when they decided they weren't ever going to have the microfilms again to be rented out to us. We went in and real quick found about 150 films that we wanted to buy. It's like, just send them to us. We'll worry about getting the money later. We'll find some nice donor. But after they quit doing that, their rationale was it was expensive. Microfilm is becoming excessively expensive to do this on. We're digitizing so much every day. might as well just go to the digital images. A lot of people were upset, but you work with what you got. After all, they're providing these services to us for free. This is one of our prides and joy. This is a website that we created. It's called chicagoancestors.org. And I don't know if you can read it, but the tagline here is Discover the Past by Address. You know that somebody lived at a particular address or intersection. You can enter that in here, and it will show you everything that's within a half mile or a mile or whatever, whatever boundary you want to put around it. So you're trying to figure out what church they might have gone to when they lived on Taylor Street at Damon, or Roby in that case. Then you can put that address in, and it will show you all the churches around. And you can say, oh man, that's only a couple of blocks from this church. That's probably where they went to church.
And it does take into account those street name changes?
Yes, it does. Now, it has a lot of other things. One is you search by keyword. So instead of saying, I want to put an address in, you say, I want to find butchers. If there are any butchers listed in any of our information collections, you can find them that way. Or by community areas. Now, there is a small confusion between community areas and neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are what we call things. Community areas are what the government calls them. Back in the 20s, they created community areas, which were at that time like a neighborhood. And the government started collecting information from financial records, from census records, all those kind of things, to draw profiles of those neighborhoods. This was the brainchild of sociologists at the University of Chicago, if I remember correctly. Now, those frequently don't bear any resemblance to the name we have now, but in some cases they do. Like if you want to look at Inglewood, you can look under a community there, and it will pop up, Inglewood and everything that we have about it in there. Now, and we'll go through some of this live once we get through here. The About menu is about the collections, how to do things, what are some questions that you might have, and how to use it. Advanced search is instead of just saying, I want this address or this community area, you say, I want to look for Lutheran churches that have the name Redeemer in it. And it will pop up all of those on a map along with a connection for you to find out more about them.
Becky, does it only cover the exact geographical boundary of the city of Chicago, or does it spill over into...
Well, because of the strange nature of cemeteries in Chicago, we have used the Chicago boundaries, but in addition, we have also included cemeteries outside the boundaries where we could find information about them. Because a lot of them moved outside the city later on. Now, we have a few articles if you want to find out what was there before the fire that's still left over, and where can you find that information. How do you look for a business and then do a study of a history of the business. Things like that are in our articles. And then the rightmost menu, Resources, is particularly useful because it gives you several options: maps of the city, street guides, and directories. And we were talking about the digitized directories. You can find them in here under the directories. You go down, and I'll show you in a minute, and you can look in those directories and literally flip through them.
Becky, are the articles searchable?
Searchable in the sense that you can read them.
Or can you do a keyword, like if you're looking for the last name Karen, can you search within the article or no?
They're not that kind of article. They're more how-to articles rather than information about a particular.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, we have two reading rooms, as we've mentioned kind of briefly. This is the reading room on the second floor. That it's actually quite large, much larger than you can see in this picture, but we didn't have it, like a 180 fisheye lens or anything. Where these materials here are, freely available. Anybody who wants to come in and look at them. These table seats are where you will sit. There are 10 publicly available computer stations there, along with printers attached to them. We have a couple of microfilm machines that have either printers or you can scan the images to a USB drive, so never leave home without your USB. Now the other room here is the special collections room, and you notice they have this glass wall to keep the hoi polloi out like us. But that's where you would go to see things that were rarer or more delicate. And you can see here there's a book here that someone's looking at that's on a cradle so that we'll hold it up and support it. So that's on the 4th floor.
Picture shows that there's material on shelves to look at?
In the special collections, yes. Most of it's reference materials, yeah. And likewise, in the next little room to this is the map room where it has more reference materials and atlases. Specific maps, specific books, they're going to have to bring out to you, but there's a lot of reference materials that are available readily to you. By the way, the map room is called the Rand McNally Map Room, in case you're wondering how good our map collection is. And somebody said, oh, they have maps there? And I says, well, let's put it this way. The map room is called the Rand McNally Map Room. They say, oh, okay. Now, you can bring your own. If you don't want to work on a public computer, you can bring your own computer, your laptop. You can bring your tablet or whatever and connect to the internet. As long as you connect through our wireless system to the internet, you can use any of our subscription databases. In fact, if you sit out front, I've discovered you can connect to the internet. So on a nice day, sit out in front of the library and do your work. But that makes it available to you so that you can use those materials while you can't use them outside of our range of our wireless. You can use them on your own machine so that you come in with your laptop with your files all ready to go. It makes it a lot easier for you rather than sitting and having to go back and forth between another computer and your computer. And so.
You can access the library edition on your own computer?
You can, yes, you can have access to Family Search, Fold 3, Ancestry, all of our subscription databases you can use on your own laptop or tablet.
You don't have to save it as email it to yourself.
No, you don't. Although that's one of my favorite ways of getting stuff home rather than printing it out. Now we talked about stacks. This is our stacks building. This is the old original building. It's 5 stories tall. This is a 10-story tall building. That ought to give you some idea how much they've compressed the space in. It's temperature and humidity controlled. When you walk out, the lights go off. They're protecting this as best they can. Conservation, preservation of the materials is an essential part of our mission.
So is that the building when a request comes in, somebody gets
Yep.
it with a shelf in there and then...
Right. That's the way it is. Yep.
Do the requests for books, are they accumulated first, like before somebody goes to the shelves, they need 5 requests or something? So it's like when the request
As soon as they come
the
in,
book goes-
somebody will go get it. That's what you have interns for.
Okay.
Now, speaking of which, getting registered. You do not have to go into the library to get all your studying and getting your books together and all that stuff ready. You can start it sitting in your jammies at home the day before if you want to. The first thing you'll have to do is get registered. Are any of you registered at the Newberry? Good. There'll be a few small changes. For instance, this card is no longer a blue paper card. We've got permanent plastic cards. So you get a new card, you can keep it. You don't have to replace it every year. You do have to re-up your subscription, but it costs nothing. So when you come in, you will have to have some sort of picture ID with your address on it. Fill out the form. You don't only have to fill out the ones that are red stars in front of them. I'll show you how to get to it when we go online. Once you're registered, you can look things up. In fact, actually before, you can look things up. For instance, you're looking for something in Williamson County. Here's a hint for you. Use subjects. Don't say any word anywhere, because I promise you, you will have 10,000 hits no matter what you ask for. So call it a subject, because when you do, it brings up a list of all the Williamson counties. Now maybe there's some in other states, but you flip down through till you get to to the Illinois ones. And you see, oh, genealogy, there are 21 books on Williamson County, Illinois. And you say, which one do I want? Oh, look, miscellaneous court records. I bet we can find something about their will, probate, something along that line. So you click on that, and you see the record. This is the general record with the title, the author, and all that stuff. And here's the wonderful part. A little button down here that says request. And you click on that, and it automatically will request that for you. It fills out this form. You don't have to fill out forms anymore. No little yellow slips of paper that you have to write everything down on. Everything's filled out for you. Down at the bottom of that page, you put submit request, and it goes in. And we send off our little minions back to the stacks to find it for you.
So Becky, when you're using catalog or something and you're finding stuff, is your registration in? So
It will ask you to fill in with your ID and password, but
looking up at the
yeah.
catalog as registered.
Now, you said, wait a minute, you said you could do this at home in your jammies. You can. You know you're going to go to the Newberry the next day. You go in and start looking through here and say, oh, I got like 7 or 8 books that I want. I can request them. And you say, wait a minute, that doesn't work because I'm not there. It does work because they stay back in the little, shelf in the computer's brain until you get there the next day. And when you sign in, it says, they're here. Go get those books. And that's, you're sitting at the table and people bring you books on a cart for you to read as long as you want to.
And again,
It definitely saves time.
they can bring you more than one book at a time.
Yes. We generally say 5, but I've seen them bring 10 or so when it's a whole series and you're not looking at very much in each one. And this is what you see. It tells you what you've asked for, a description of it, and what the order status is. Is it checked out, or is it, have you, used it before, things like that. So your order history, these are your outstanding requests.
Now, can you do the same with microfilm and things?
It's going to depend. We have microfilm. A lot of our microfilm is on the second floor in the genealogy section. So things like the Chicago Daily News, the church records, city directories that are on microfilm, that you don't have to have a request for. You just, come up to us and say, let's go get it, and then we will. Because that's one of the things about us is we have somebody at that desk sitting there ready to help you from the time we open until the time we close. By the way, ding ding, new hours. We've gotten better hours. We are now open every day, Tuesday through Saturday, from 10 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon, except Wednesday when we're open till 7. So those of you who wanted to come on a Saturday, and in the past it's only been a half day, it's now a full day, and we also have evening hours. So it's a little better that way. More questions? Okay.
If you could tell us briefly about digitizing your material, how many people do that? What's it like?
Digitizing it yourself?
No, at Newberry.
Oh, okay. Depending on what format it's in, we either use a small surface flatbed or we have hover cameras. And we're planning on getting fairly soon some hover cameras that you can use on the floor so you could digitize things yourself. But we digitize them with those kind of things. If you're, for instance, sending in a request and say, would you copy chapter 1 of this book for me, they will scan it all, and unless you want it printed out, they will email it to you, which means you will probably get it within 24 hours. I know, it's amazing to me too.
But you're paying per page, right?
You're paying per page, yeah. I think we go, if it's like 10 pages, we're not going to charge you.
Are you actively digitizing bulk material and stuff that...
We are actively digitizing, period. We have a whole, unit that does nothing but digitizing. At the moment we have...
What I'm interested in. If you could just tell us briefly about that.
Okay. if you go to a website, a URL called digcoll.newberry.org, you will be dropped into the middle of 1 million plus digital images. Now the search material, the search mechanism is not great yet. We're working on that, but with 1 million of them, my goodness. I just received a list again this morning, of about 25 things that they've digitized in the last month. So, yes, we are actively digitizing.
What was the website again?
DIGCOLL, Digital Collections, digcoll.newberry.org. It's almost scary how much stuff they have there. And I think a lot of it is stored through Internet Archive, but you can get it through us.
Is that something you can see on a tour?
Huh?
If you go down there for a tour, is that something they'll let you see?
What, the digital collections?
No, where they do it?
I don't think so, because for one thing, the tours are on the weekends. We have 2 sets of people who work there. People who work from Monday through Friday and then Tuesday through Saturday. So unfortunately, the tours don't overlap with when the digital people are there.
Okay, I got it. Excellent.
Mm-hmm. This is all of us saying hi. Now, is it all right if I overwrite this? Okay. I was telling you about Chicago ancestors. This is actually version 2 of it. We started it a number of years ago, longer than I like to think, because I worked on that original version too. But as I say, this is where you can search by address, by keyword, or browse by community. And you see this one has a drop-down menu. So some of the neighborhoods you recognize as neighborhoods maybe, like Albany Park and Beverly and Bridgeport.
So if you select one of those, it's sort of preset to give you the street boundary areas that constitutes their community?
Yeah, we'll look at Albany Park.
Oh.
It zooms in so that it can show you Albany Park. It's outlined here. And then all of these little things here, the little pins here, are items that we have some information or pictures of that are in Albany Park. Tabor, This apparently is a church that's at Sunnyside and Drake. In addition to having all of those, we give you a short, so it varies considerably based on how much information we've been able to get about the area, but it tells you where you can find out some information about it, like the Encyclopedia of Chicago. And there's a huge Carly, which is the something research library. It's an Illinois consortium of 70 or 80 libraries that have brought their digital collections together. And what they've done is find where these pictures are that have to go with Albany Park. And I think that's pretty amazing that they were able to find any of them. Yes, sir?
If you have an address, can you get a brief history of what was on that location?
Not necessarily.
My grandfather had a big old Victorian there that was, I went there recently in the last 5 years or so, and it's replaced by some yuppie.
Let me guess, condominiums, right? They're even turning churches into them. Okay.
It was a poor area when I lived there, but no more. 1722 Orchard Street. 1722.
Can you put in corners?
Sir?
Could you put corners in?
Intersections? Yeah, like Staten and Madison or something, yeah. For some reason, he couldn't find it. I wonder, maybe the street name has changed. Maybe that.
I think so.
It's up, like,
Let's look at some of the other things. I was telling you that the About has the collection descriptions, and that'll give you an idea of the range of collections we have. Digitized books, Houses of Chicago. We have some things that are associated with the Chicago Genealogical Society, synagogue collections, church collections, yearbook collections. And those are the kind of things that you'll find when you search. And as I say, you can do an advanced search, which means you could choose any of these categories, like buildings and structures, and then maybe you want to look at it for those in Armour Square, or maybe you want to look for things that are associated with various ethnicities. If you do, you can do that. And it shows you these pins all over. And then it lists them. And you can sort these by the title, so that, you know, if you know you're looking for something that starts with A or B or C or something like that, you can look at these. Group 120 of the Polish Women's Alliance of America. By the way, if any of you happen to read Polish, we would love to have you volunteer. We have records from the Polish Women's Alliance that we can't read. But we'd like to make them available somehow. So you can.
Why don't you send me an email about that? About like maybe
Polish?
Maybe I could do a blog post.
Okay. So you can choose any one or combination of these if you wanted to look for a particular collection, cemeteries in a particular area. So you can add them together. It's at this point you're saying, I want this community area and this and then cemeteries. And it says, sorry, no matches. Okay, no cemeteries. We don't have to worry about that in Chicago alone. Here are the articles you would ask about. It's about how he created different units, political and otherwise, city council proceedings, directories, pre-fire Chicago. Not everything was burned up. And you have to remember, going back to knowing your local history, you can't always assume that other people know the same local history you do. I got a call one day from a fellow who wanted to know if there was a particular building at the corner of Harrison and Halstead. And I said, oh, okay, about what time period? And he says, oh, 1871. And I said, oh no, I think it went up with the fire. And he says, what fire? Excuse me, sir, where are you calling from? Oh, British Columbia, no wonder. So always be aware of important dates in the history and be aware that not everybody knows them. There are breaks in the directories. This describes why there are breaks and where they are. And the resources that I had mentioned, which I think are particularly useful. You can look at some maps of Chicago, different ones. Some of them are coming out of the Encyclopedia of Chicago online. And you can see you're getting the boulevards and park systems showing up very clearly here. Douglas Park, Humboldt, Garfield, and all the green lines for the boulevards.
This is all in the ChicagoAncestors.org.
Yes. And more information on where else you can look for maps. Newspapers we've discussed. Property research might be useful to you. Property searches, assessor's office, how to find those kind of pieces of information. Here are the renumbering guides that go back to 1909 and 1911, and the street name changes. Annexations, additions, I was talking about how they were gobbling up communities. Well, this describes when each particular community was taken over by Chicago. Streets and directories. These are the directories that have been digitized. In 1866, that's pretty far back in the history. Front matter is usually where you can find the things like the list of police districts and city hall and those kinds of things, along with a list of churches, asylums, other institutions. And a street guide is frequently a part of it so that you can help find the streets. But you look for, a particular name. You look by the last name and it shows you this, and yes, you can enlarge it because we would all go blind with this. Come on, there we go. So you can actually read it. Cusick's. Nice Irish name, isn't it? But you can see, you can read very clearly. Cigar maker, that's who he worked for. R meaning residence. Residence is at 179 Monroe. So we have these 10 directories that we have available online, city directories. And in addition, all the other ones are available via microfilm, which means you would have to come in to see them. But if you can sit here and say, 1885, 1892, you've just about bracketed that 1890 census that got burned /
Becky, do your microfilm readers have the ability to download to a flash drive?
Yes, we have 2 that are, and they both of them will also print. If you just want to scan and don't need to print or anything, we have several others that are more primitive, with the hand cranks and stuff. But yes, we can download, and you can download, and you can, which comes in very handy for us. We're doing reference work for people. Somebody wants to see an obituary, we can take a scan of it and then email it to them. It's amazing what we can do with the technology these days. But these are the directories that we have available as digital images. I wanted to also show you this is the main page. Notice we are not a com, we are an org, an organization. Reading rooms are closed the 16th for President's Day, Saturday the 16th for President's Day. Some upcoming events. We have an enormous amount of classes, seminars, presentations. You can find out about them through the programs and events. If you're visiting, this gives you some idea of things like locations, hours, the bookshop. But when you first get on, in order to back to the main page, newberry.org. Over here is searching the catalogs. This is the online catalog. You can choose keywords, author, title, subject. Put that in. Or you can do an advanced search, which gives you options so you can look for more than one thing to narrow it down even more. We talked about, just briefly, manuscripts. This will help you search for whether we have a collection. For instance, if you put Ben Hecht in there, you would find that we own the Ben Hecht papers. For those of you who might not know who Ben Hecht was, he was, among other things, a screenwriter for movies and won an Oscar. And every year we have a contest to see who can pick the most Oscar winners. Out of the staff could all join in, they pick the Oscar winners, and the prize is you get to hold Ben Hecht's Oscar and have your picture taken.
You're saying you have an Oscar in your collection?
We have an Oscar in our collection.
You should have brought that with you.
You think they're going to let me walk out the door with that? Right, I can't walk out the door with a book. This is for logging in or registering. You'll be registering first. This is, first-time user. That's where you'll create your account name and your password. And then once you have that, you can log on. This provides guidelines for using the material. Don't write in them, don't bring food upstairs, things like that. And reproduction policies, you were asking about scanning, making copies of things. It describes it all and tells you whatever the prices are.
Becky, is there like a little coffee shop in your?
Yes, there is. It's not exactly a coffee shop. Nothing nearly as elaborate as yours. We have a lounge area. When you first walk in and you go up the little stairs, there's a welcome center where they register you and provide information and basics, where you can put your coat up in the locker rooms and things like that. And just off of that is a little lounge area where we have coffee and tea, and we don't charge for it. It's amazing. I think the staff drink it all up mostly, but you can sit, if you just want some quiet time, if you brought your own lunch and put it in the locker, you can sit down there and eat there. And it's also attached to the bookstore, which is a fabulous little bookstore. So I'm hoping I can remember. Aha! So you can see I've been, taking some things out. And I want to make a new request. I go to the catalog. You can go from here to the catalog, find what you want, and make the request, and it'll fill it in here.
So that was the list that was being created for material that somebody's going to retrieve from the
Yep.
house for you.
Right. And like I say, all you have to do is show up there, and it knows when you scan your brand new plastic card in, when you scan it in, it knows you're here, and they start looking for them.
If you have a reference question, do you go where the book is being brought to you, or do you have access to go? Do you ever go to the 10-story building to go?
Oh no, that's the reason they're called closed stacks. You don't. It's even better. I mean, think of it this way. You're getting luxury service. You go in, you sit at a table. It's got a nice little green banker's lamp on it.
Yeah, I know from my experience, sometimes you don't find the magic answer in the first thing you're looking at.
No.
Then it seems like there's a lot of requests that could go up and back to retrieve.
It does, and that's what we hire these people to do. So, seriously, you request it. When you get there, you say, I want to sit at, table L in seat 1. And you go to there, and it appears. It's amazing to me still.
Has that system always been in effect?
No, this is fairly new. We went to an electronic system called Aon to keep up with the catalogs, requests, all kinds of information associated with the library about 2 years ago. In fact, we had a birthday party for the software because we love it so. But no, this has not been in use for very long. It's relatively new. Other questions? Well, I can tell you, it's been fun. I hope to see every one of you there sometime soon because it's a great place and it's nice people. You're allowed to take one person with you to the holiday dinner. These people are really good on dinners, let me tell you. But I take a friend with me to the holiday dinner, and afterwards they're going, these are such great people. I says, it's all right they have purple hair and tattoos? Because we're a pretty laid-back group. But they love what they're doing. People leave the Newberry, and darn if they don't come back in 3 or 4 years because they just can't stay away from it. It's amazing. So,
Who would go, now, there's yourself as a genealogy specialist. Are there others that are?
genealogy specialists, yes. Matt Rutherford is the curator and head of the genealogy and local history. He's the one who gets to pick out the books and spend the money. And I'm not permitted to spend any money. And we have Grace Dumas, who literally has written books on finding your Chicago ancestors. So needless to say, you got a knowledgeable source there. She can also help you do your house history and find your businesses and everything else. She's an amazing lady. So that's the 3 of us. Then we have several others who are reference librarians who have been trained to do genealogical research. And they also know how to pick up the phone and call and say, Becky, where do you find the Sanborn maps? So you know, we're always there to back each other up, but there will always be somebody that you can ask the question to. That's, you know, kind of an article of faith with us. Okay. Okay.
We thank you for driving out.
My pleasure.
We enjoyed it. Thank
And you're a wonderful audience.